You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday 28th of April 2014. Lloyds drops overdraft fee on Islamic accounts. Modern slavery a massive problem in Britain. How can Britain deport a child at risk of FGM? Theresa May must think again. German court bans Muslim pupil from wearing a face veil. Netherlands, refugee status for Somali pirates unacceptable, VVD. Barbarous gang rape in Evry. Downgraded by S&P, Russia proposes scorched earth retaliation against NATO countries. Palestinians reward terrorists from British aid. Iraq's dwindling Christian community face disaster. Thought for the day, a country divided. And finally, 2 for 1 day, Monday. UK news. Lloyds drops overdraft fee on Islamic accounts. Lloyds Bank has been accused of religious discrimination after offering free overdraft accounts to Muslims. The bank sent customers a booklet this month explaining new charges. While many will have to pay up to £80 a month if they go into the red, Muslims were told they would escape the charges. One customer, Anita Milton, a nurse at New Eltham, South London, said, "I can't believe that they're thinking of offering one account for Muslims and making everyone else pay for the same service. Do I have to change my religion to get the best deal?" World at 8. Simple answer, Anita, yes. Modern slavery a massive problem in Britain. The number of people being used as slaves in the UK is increasing, according to a charity. Hope for Justice, which campaigns against human trafficking, said the problem of forced labour, domestic servitude and sexual exploitation is a massive problem in Britain. Sky News has obtained Freedom of Information figures showing that within the last 3 years, 336 slavery offences were investigated by police in the UK. Alan Doherty, the head of operations for Hope and Justice, says the statistics are not a true representation of the problem. One estimate it must be at least 10 times that, and that is just for the number of offences being investigated by law enforcement agencies. The actual number of trafficking victims is probably 100 times that again, because at least 90% of victims probably never even come to the attention of authorities or charities such as ours because it's such a hidden crime. World at 8. Of course they are ignoring the elephant in the room. It is mainly a crime committed by foreigners who come to this country to do just that. How can Britain deport a child at risk of FGM? Theresa May must think again. Hilary Burrage on theguardian.com asks the question and makes that demand. She argues that 2-year-old Rashidat was born in the UK after her mother fled a forced marriage to an older man. Now the Home Office wants to send her to Nigeria. Hilary continues with, "How much can we risk the safety of a small child? What if that risk was of female genital mutilation? And what if the child was born in Britain but is being sent to a country where FGM is prevalent? Surely the government should be concerned." After a lengthy and emotional appeal it ends with, "It can never be okay to send small children away to risk atrocities like FGM." World at 8. Hillary's argument falls not on deaf ears, but ears that hear and a mind that says the solution to this problem is not Theresa May or any European government. It is down to the populace of countries such as Nigeria and Cameroon, amongst others. Britain cannot accept every child. In attempting to do so, we have allowed so many into Britain that FGM is as much of a problem here in certain immigrant communities as it is in their home countries. Children are their parents' responsibilities. If England didn't have a ridiculous benefit system, none of these people would be here in the first place. European news. German courts ban Muslim pupil from wearing face veil. A court in Bavaria has banned a school pupil from wearing a face veil during lessons, rejecting her argument that she has a constitutional right to do so. The 18-year-old Muslim pupil has been shut out of lessons at a state-run vocational college near Regensburg for refusing to remove her niqab, a garment which covers the hair and face, leaving only the eyes visible. She took the matter to court, arguing that the ban was a contravention of her constitutional right to religious expression. The Bavarian Administrative Court rejected her complaint in a ruling on April 22nd on the basis that the school's demand to remove the veil for lessons did not represent an illegal restriction of her rights. The wearing of the face-covering veil during teaching periods, the court wrote, in their published statement, preventing essential non-verbal communication between teachers and pupils. Judges found that the right of the state to educate took priority over the pupil's right to religious expression. Open communication during teaching is based not only on the spoken word, but also on non-verbal elements such as facial expressions, gestures and other body language, the court said. If these elements of communication are missing, the ruling stated, teachers could no longer properly fulfil their jobs. Netherlands, refugee status for Somali pirates unacceptable, VVD. It would be unacceptable if 3 Somali men convicted of piracy were to be given refugee status in the Netherlands, according to VVD parliamentarians. These troublemakers should be thrown out of the country as quickly as possible, MP Malik Asmani said. The pirates have been released from jail but will not be deported because their applications for asylum are still being processed. The situation is too bizarre for words, as Asmani said. First you shoot at Dutch soldiers and then you request asylum here, he is quoted as saying. It is unacceptable that these criminals want to remain here. The 3 are part of a group of 9 Somali pirates jailed for 4.5 years in 2011 after going on trial in the Netherlands. Having served 2/3 of their sentence, they have now been released from jail. France. Barbarous gang rape in Évry. On March the 30th, a little past midnight, in a park in Évry, the administrative centre of Prime Minister Manuel Valls' district. Since it took place the night before the second round of the municipal elections, it did not get the attention it deserved. That night, an 18-year-old girl got off the regional rail at Évry station and made a call on her cell phone. 4 individuals jumped on her, dragged her to a nearby park. They stripped her of everything, then they undressed her and raped her, taking turns. An indescribable rape of barbaric cruelty. The gang of 4 tortured her for more than 2 hours before leaving her, bleeding. A driver in a passing car took her and called for help. She had enough strength to file a complaint. The police went with her to the ER where she was given a 3-month exemption from work. Now she is traumatised for life. Thanks to her detailed description and the video surveillance images, the police arrested the 4 suspects in less than 24 hours and their DNA confirmed their guilt. The questioning began on March 31st in the afternoon. The 4 rapists are minors. 2 of them are 13, 1 15 and 1 17. 3 Turkish brothers and 1 Moroccan. World at 8. Special facts. The eldest, 17, had been released 6 months earlier after serving 2/3 of a 2-year sentence for the rape of the son of a gendarme sub-officer. Released without surveillance. Now he is a repeat offender. 2 of the others have already been arrested for armed robbery. 4 criminals, 3 repeat offenders and all minors. During the questioning and from what we know about the investigation, the minors did not express the slightest remorse. On the contrary, they expressed their hatred. Yes, they would not have touched the girl if she had been a Turk. Yes, they attacked her because she was French, and the French are all sons of whores. The judge who jailed them indicted them for gang rape and barbarity, but also, and this is very rare from the French, for racism. Another World at 8 note. Deportation for all their families and them. These people get away with it because they know in their own country they will be executed, perhaps, or made to pay jizya to the family of the girl. In Europe they are fed and watered for years in prison and then set free to do just the same again and again and again. World news. Downgraded by S&P, Russia proposes scorched earth retaliation against NATO countries. First, in retaliation to the downgrade, Russian Economic Minister Alexei Yulyakov said S&P's downgrade of Russia's rating was expected by investors. It won't significantly change their behaviour, adding the obvious that the decision to cut Russia's rating was partly political, partly based on the economic situation. In other words, entirely symbolic. It is not as if Russia has access to bonds markets anyway, plus, as we wrote earlier this week in Why Putin is Smiling at the Bond Market's Blockade of Russia, it is not as if it needs them. But far more importantly, and ahead of yet another round of Western sanctions, which appears imminent unless Obama is to look even more powerless than he currently is, granted a difficult achievement, Russian presidential advisor Sergei Glazov proposed plan of 15 measures to protect country's economy if sanctions are applied. The Vedomosti newspaper reports, citing Glaznev's letter to the finance ministry. According to Vedomosti, as Bloomberg reported, Glazyev proposed Russia should withdraw all assets, accounts in dollars, euros from NATO countries to neutral ones. Russia should start selling NATO member sovereign bonds before Russia's foreign currency accounts are frozen. Central banks should reduce dollar assets, sell sovereign bonds of countries that support sanctions. Russia should limit commercial banks' FX assets to prevent speculation on ruble capital outflows. Central banks should increase money supply so that state-caused banks may refinance foreign loans. Russia should use national currencies in trade with customs union members, other non-dollar, non-euro partners. In other words, a full-blown scorched earth campaign by Russia. Palestinians reward terrorists from British aid. Israel objects to Britain over aid indirectly funding Palestinian convicts. During his recent visit to Israel, the Prime Minister delivered a high-profile speech to the Knesset, Israel's parliament. In me, he said, you have a British Prime Minister whose belief in Israel is unbreakable and whose commitment to Israel's security will always be rock solid. But according to a senior Israeli government source, behind the scenes Israeli officials were raising serious concerns with the British delegation about the relationship between UK aid money, the Palestinian Authority, and reward payments to terrorists. The Israeli charge is grave that British aid to the Palestinian government, worth £343 million between 2011 and 2015, is funding generous salaries and bonuses to about 5,000 convicted terrorists. This money, they say, not only rewards terror but also exacerbates the threat by diluting the deterrent of a prison sentence. Iraq's dwindling Christian community faced disaster. Iraq's dwindling Christian community faces a disaster, and if no action is taken, they will number just a few thousand in a decade, the country's most senior church leader told FAP. Chaldean patriarch Louis Sacco said the daily migration of Christians from Iraq was terrifying and blamed a range of factors, including generally poor security in the country and worsening religious extremism. Iraq's Christian community is a shadow of what it used to be, once numbering more than 1 million nationwide, with upwards of 600,000 in Baghdad alone. There are now fewer than 400,000 across the country. Because Christians do not retain tribal affiliations in a way Muslim Arabs do, they have little recourse for resolving disputes outside the Iraqi legal system, which is often criticised for corruption and subject to manipulation. World at 8. Genocide in another name, but of course this crime against Christians in any country by Muslims is just considered fair game by the UN and NATO, who are heavily biased towards Islam. Thought for the day. A thought divided. We have a relationship with each other rather like the US and the UK. We are basically one people divided by a common language. And in the case of us in the UK, it is the language of diversity, tolerance, sympathy, of which the true Brits have enormous empathy with, versus the language and message of Islam. Now the New World Order, of which I shall talk more on Wednesday, is clearly batting for either the Chinese or the Islamic communities taking over Europe. Which one and why is totally beyond me as a human being and a European. I cannot imagine anyone with either half a brain wanting either of these two very different cultures within the European space. And these guys are supposed to be the brain boxes and financial wizards of our world. So God help us. I believe it is because the powers that be have made such a cock-up of our country since the last World War that they are busy getting rid, and if it means the total destruction of everything English, then that is what will happen, whilst we are calmly watching Brits Don't Have Talent behind our firmly sealed doors that go along with our firmly sealed minds. How else could you explain to a stranger from another world the situation within Europe today? How could you explain it to a primitive from days before official governments, states and monarchy? How could you explain it to a tribe of people who are still striving to exist within the modern world and so-called progress, and will give their right arms for law and order and stability? How can we, the English, justify to our grandchildren just how far we have removed ourselves from actually participating in keeping anything of our culture for future generations? Although history is written by the victors, one day our time will be looked back upon either with fond memories and a sense of achievement, or with shock and horror that we allowed what is classed as the inevitable to happen. Our world might not end with a bang, but a whimper from a downtrodden and enslaved people. And the root cause of our problems in Europe, ably helped and monitored by the European Union, NATO and the UN, is immigration, as it was with the Roman Empire thousands of years ago. Civil unrest always starts from within, never outside that country. Look at history. All the wars fought in the world, discounting the last 2 world wars, were brought about by possible and probable invasions of that territory, and the people indigenous to that territory united to fight that invader. Whether they won or not is not important. It is the fact that they were united to fight what was an obvious and clear signal of invasion of their lands and their people. The New World Order, knowing this, had to think along different lines. They had to find a way of one of 2 undercover and hidden attacks against the Western world, primarily Europe and the UK. First came the financial breakdown, property decline, business decline, and please note that all the while these scenes had their effect on the indigenous population, foreign aid and immigration were not halted, and neither was the lending and borrowing leading to our national debt. We in the UK printed a few million new notes, sold off most of our ailing businesses and corporations cheaply, and told the media to say that we are out of the mess that we didn't put ourselves in the first place. Very clever indeed. But all the while, subtly and without stopping, millions of newcomers were let into this country over the last 55 years. A non-stop, continuous oil slick of humanity, and like oil slicks it built up momentum until it could not be stopped. At a time in the early 70s when mutterings over immigration were not considered punishable by death, the New World Order, courtesy of the Frankfurt School of Indoctrination, brought in racism and the apparent need for diversity within our learning and working environments. It became quickly media popular to have the need for a black one-legged transgender employee because that would ensure that your business would not be for the high jump and would get financial governmental help if needed. Why? Because it was for the people. And by people, I mean particularly the entire ethnic content of the world in general transferred to the UK in particular. Add to this cauldron of diversity a particularly nasty religious mix and a definitely diverse ethnic mix, and add to the already unhappy English people, and what do you have? You have Islam in all its glory, and no one in their right minds would think that this particular religion, with its hatred of all things non-Islamic, would sit quietly by in any country they travel to and integrate. They never have, and they never will. Not since the year 800 AD have Muslims ever been a quiet, industrious or relatively intelligent people, like the Hebrews for instance. There have been no significant Muslim achievements other than outbreeding everyone else, outfighting everyone else, or just plain out killing everyone else. Few authors, few medical breakthroughs, few anything other than wars and fighters and breeders. But then, unlike the Chinese with their old imperial culture, fighting and breeding are the only things they have in common with Islam. But what is more serious than the fact that Islam is over here and 150 million of them are in Europe is the fact that we and other Europeans are sitting back and, with the exception of a few die-hard nationalists, seem to be preparing ourselves for conversion to Islam. Why else do we allow more in even after 9/11 in the States and the much lesser incident in London in 7/7? The Lee Rigby killing and the Muslim grooming gangs are still on our minds, or are they? Do we forget so easily? I fear we do. It is out of mind, off the TV, out of the papers, and yup, out of our minds is the sentence that springs to mind. We live in the only country in the world that would watch and take pictures of a young white man being run down and beheaded in broad daylight. We are the only country in the world who would put up with 35 years of rape, sodomization and abductions of our very young non-Muslim girls and not give a jot. We're the only country in the world who gives honours and finances to strangers who do not have our interests at heart. In fact, we must be the only people in the world who don't bite the hand that doesn't feed them. Why else, other than a long-term plan, would the police hold off on arresting and stop and searching possible terrorists, searching and arresting the families of the grooming gangs, arresting and deporting anti-Christian and anti-white Muslim clerics and their prodigious families? In this country we have forgotten we are English tribes, or diverse products of same. We have forgotten our roots, but the followers of Islam have not forgotten theirs, or the reason why they came and still come. A better life is the least of it. It is greed and lust and envy. In fact, all the things primitive man united and fought against in days of old. Only this invasion is meant to be by the New World Order, and by that I mean people in power, united not by religion or causes, but by money and power. And in my book, that is a truly disgusting cause by a disgusting band of people. They are using one religion to finish another and one culture to finish another culture, and they are doing it with a whimper and not a bang. The only voice in the wilderness is the voice of the British National Party. All others are poor imitations. For years we've been pilloried and vilified for objecting to the overrunning of our country by foreigners and Islam, and we have received nothing but the most objectionable comments. Now, because even the idiot in the streets can see he is becoming a minority in his own country, the three other parties mumble and splutter about immigration figures, and of course if you think UKIP is anti-immigration, then you need your bumps felt. By the way, that is called phrenology. Pat Condell's latest video on Islam is as usual wonderful. I know he dislikes the BNP and probably never would listen to this news, but I like him, and he has a great handle on Islam and the problems it hasn't yet even started to bring to this country. We've lost London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leicester to Islam, make no mistake, we have. If we don't wake up and get more fundamental or anti-Islamic ourselves, our time will be short and very painful. Condell is right regarding Islamophobia. There ain't such an animal. Why? Because people have phobias over irrational things, and Islam and its followers are not irrational. They are here. They are working very hard to assimilate us, rather like the Borg. And like the Borg, they share a hive mentality, which cuts out the Brits like a knife. The nearest thing we have to a hive mentality is when the World Footy is on, or the bloody Olympics. Or someone dies whom we don't know at all and only care about after death, with hysterical outpourings and bunches of African grown flowers. I just hope one day, before it is too late, before the last mosque is built, before the last school becomes a madrassar, and before the last non-Muslim child is born, that we, the English and inheritors of this country, wake up and stop relying on either the future or some greedy politician to make a weak point and do nothing. My bets are on the Brits, and I hope they don't let our country down. And finally, 2 for One Day Monday. If you buy stuff online, check out the seller very carefully. Be careful what you purchase on eBay. A friend just spent $100 on a penis enlarger. Bastard sent him a magnifying glass. Instructions said, do not use in the sunlight. And in hindsight, I should have posted my Facebook status as, I've blown the head gasket on my 1997 XR3i rather than I've just buggered a 14-year-old escort. The police still haven't seen the funny side. My laptop's been confiscated and the wife has gone off to her mother. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night.